Brothers and sisters, I want to see your hands up there. Let me see your hands. I want everybody to kick up some noise. I want to hear some revolution out there, brothers. I want to hear a little revolution. Brothers and sisters, the time has come for each and every one of you to decide whether you are going to be the problem or whether you are going to be the solution. That's right. You must choose, brothers. You must choose. It takes 5 seconds. 5 seconds of decision. 5 seconds to realize your purpose here on the planet. It takes 5 seconds to realize that it's time to move. It's time to get down with it. Brothers, it's time to testify, and I want to know, are you ready to testify? Are you ready? I give you a testimony. Pick up the jazz, motherfucker! Yeah!
When I first met Dave Marsh, he was a rock writer, and I got to meet him at his house, and like one of the first things he said to me was that there was no excuse for writing "Take It Easy."
I connected to Dave because I knew he felt about music the way I felt about it. It was life sustaining.
I mean, he's always had a larger vision about how rock fits into the American experience.
This whole new journalism thing was so new and so exciting, giving credibility to rock, period. And Dave brought in soul music into that, which was really quite insightful.
Because of his push to see the critical conversation be democratized and inclusive and incredibly diverse, made the field welcome for people like myself.
That Dave has always been vociferously a champion of equal rights in music writing and of viewing music outside of categories formed by the music industry and too often the music press.
It was their love of music that brought them into journalism in music. They were not just reviewing it from the point of view of they like it or they don't like it, but they took it very seriously.
R&B and soul and rock and roll music was so much the center of the cultural conversation in the 60s and 70s. It was central to your existence. And all of Dave's writing, his intensity matched mine as far as how serious we were taking what we were doing.
Just say that Dave is a seminal writer. He's a seminal American writer. And he is not often touted as for the significance that he has as a writer, period.
Hear, hear.
Welcome, everybody, to Music Like Our Lives Depend on It. This is a program presented by the League of Revolutionaries for a New America in conjunction with 100,000 Poets for Change. You can find that information on your screen, and a celebration of the work of Dave Marsh, whose book, Kick Out the Jams, was published August 15th. This is a book which is very much about the way in which art and social change takes place. My name is Lou Rosenbaum. I'm your co-host for Music Like Our Lives Depend on It. I'm a poet. I came to know Dave and his work because of my many years as a bookseller. I met Dave because I've had the honor to meet and the pleasure to appreciate and work with many writers and artists by doing cultural work as a member of the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. My co-host is Adam Gottlieb. He's a songwriter, a band leader of Chicago's Adam Gottlieb and One Love, which is a fusion band serving songs of the revolution. Adam was politicized by participating in young Chicago authors' poetry process known as Louder Than a Bomb. And he's extended that work tremendously in musical endeavors, including their first full album, All of You, and the reggae single, When the People Ride. Daniel Wolfe is the co-editor of Kick Out the Jams. He is a poet. His most recently published work is More Poems About Money, something I'm dying to read because I really want to get more money. No doubt about that. But he's also an amazing cultural historian. Most recently, How to Be an American. But one of my favorites of his books is about Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, and the Calumet, Michigan massacre called Grown Up Anger. It brilliantly weaves together themes of music, politics, and history. Lauren Onkey is the director of the Corcoran School of Arts and Design at George Washington University, where she's also a professor of music. She brought a breath of life into NPR when she was senior music director there. And before that, she spent 7 years shaking up the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She has an extensive academic background as well, but she's never allowed that to interfere with her contributions to cultural work. Danny Alexander. Danny Alexander teaches English at Johnson County Community College in Kansas City, and most recently is the author of Real Love, No Drama, about the life and music of Mary J. Blige. Danny writes about music for many publications, including his insightful blog, Take Them As They Come, and he will, I'm sure, give you that information in the chat as to where you can find it. We would like to start with an opening for all three of you guys. How did you first encounter Dave Marsh's work? Danny, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think a lot like Lauren, I was about 12 or 13 reading Rolling Stone, if I remember right from what she said before. And Dave's voice stood out to me. I had several favorite writers, but Dave's voice stood out to me from the pack because it felt like he was speaking very directly to me. And then and validated sometimes opinions I had. I mean, sometimes I often disagreed with him, but he also validated opinions I had that it didn't seem like anyone else did, especially in the rock critic press. So, introducing that idea that, it was okay to disagree in essence and to stand up for yourself. When I was in college, I saw he could come to campus. I got involved in a speakers group just to bring him in because I was trying to get a friend of mine to bring him in, and she said, well, join the group and you can bring him in. So he came to our campus, he spoke, great talk. He was focused very much on censorship at that time when, the Senate was holding hearings on the evils of music, particularly heavy metal. And well, heavy metal was a big focus in rap. But, we left that first couple of days we spent together. He left me with his phone number. He left me with Leonard Peltier's name, which I was not familiar with. He left me with Spieber Gordon's name, who was in prison for trumped up charges for vote fraud in Alabama. And I immediately was sort of put into motion, both thinking about writing about music for him and thinking about how I took all the political stuff that was in the air, it was in at the time, and put it to use as a part of my writing. I always saw those two things as completely interconnected too, probably because I was part of that wave of politics and music, because I was part of that wave of the kids who, upon getting turned on to music in the late 70s, were seeing it as a social movement, particularly in the form of, at that time, punk, and then very, very shortly after becoming aware of hip hop. And so I started writing for him. Eventually he started publishing some of what I wrote, and we maintained we maintained the relationship for, to this day. So,
Lauren, how about you?
Hey everybody, thank you so much, Lou, for pulling all this together. Yeah, I mean, I first read Dave. I mean, that's how I discovered him, I guess. And the piece I think I read first was on the Who in Rolling Stone when he had the American Grandstand column. And it was funny, by then I was just obsessed with music and reading music, but I couldn't, Rolling Stone wasn't at my local candy store newsstand, and that's where I bought magazines. So I was a Cream reader more than a Rolling Stone reader, and only occasionally saw issues of Rolling Stone. And the first one that somehow showed up, I read that article, and there's nothing exactly mind-blowing about that piece, but I think his passion for the music, his skills as a writer, and the way in which he's such a Who fan, it gave me a framework to understand the Who. And I don't know, maybe it was 1,000 words, if that. I mean, those columns were short, but it just felt, and I've been thinking about this word a lot since the book came out, and it felt like an invitation. It didn't make me feel like I didn't know stuff or I needed to like be in the right crowd or know the right things. It was sort of like, come into my world, come into kind of how I'm thinking. And then I would just read him whenever I could. And I was a big Springsteen fan. And when he did the cover story in 1978 on Springsteen, which is just a terrific piece of writing, he follows the tour for a couple of weeks in July of 1978. And that's kind of when I realized, oh, he writes about Springsteen. So I just really followed his work, was really interested in the way in which he contextualized the music in culture and politics in a way that I didn't think anybody else would be doing, or that I was reading that was doing that effectively. And he could write, it was like, I always wanted to kind of keep reading, and I would learn a lot from his work. And we met when I got out of college. I was in New York for a couple of years, and I worked at Pantheon Books, who was publishing so many great people at that time in the mid 80s. And he was working with one of the editors there on a project, and the book, the rock and roll, at that time, Rock and Roll Confidential report came out from Pantheon. And that was just at the time I got there. And he was in the office one day, and I introduced myself. And similar to what Danny's saying, I mean, he was just kind to me. And I was a young writer, and I wanted to be connected to the music. And he, kind of said, let me know how I can help you. And so we just stayed in touch over the years and got to be friends, I would say, probably 20 years later. But it just gave me that real boost. But I always wanted to know what he thought about the current state of the music business and the world when I could find his work.
Daniel.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this, Lou. I see many people I know in this crowd, all of them smarter than I am, so I hope everybody's going to talk some. I will briefly tell you how I knew Dave. One of the people I think is watching is my older sister, who was an Elvis Presley fan. And she was kind enough or negligent enough to leave the Golden Hits album in our house. And I wasn't supposed to like Elvis Presley anymore. He was old, not fat yet, but old. But I did. I thought he was great. And that naturally carried over into Bruce Springsteen, who is Elvis's grandson, or maybe son. And my wife, Marta Renzi, made a video for public television called You Little Wild Heart, based on Springsteen music. And we wanted to get it to Bruce because we knew he was going to love it. And the way to do that was to get to Dave, which turned out to be easy. He called Marta back. He was what Lauren said about invitations is absolutely right. And Danny, he was open to new stuff. So we went up to his apartment in New York City to show him the video. This was pre-internet. We couldn't get it to him any other way. And he was more than willing, let us in. I walked in the door and I was wearing an Elvis belt buckle. And he looked at it and he pointed at it and he said, "We're going to be friends." And that's where it started. And he was, funny and mean and full of anger and just a totally interesting guy from the beginning. So we hooked up 40 something years ago.
Maybe one of the things, and all of you have talked in one way or another about the politics being important in his writing that reached out to you. What is it in the politics that reached out to you? Anybody?
Well, funny and angry was where I was going, Lou. It's complicated. We could spend the next hour talking about this. And if you guys have read the book, know that it's a complicated kind of politics. It's also what Springsteen said in that video. It mattered to him. And having the music matter to him meant, wait a second, Smokey Robinson is smarter than my racist father. It meant Madonna actually had something to say and was important, not just a face or a body. So the politics, part of the politics were acknowledging to me, all of these different aspects as legitimate and interesting and important. And the politics kind of flowed from that. Wait a second, if Smokey Robinson is actually smart, I got to rethink a whole series of things that America is telling me and that I don't believe in. And Dave was formidable at that.
I think I'd add that for me at a really young age, right, that art is political, that art is not a kind of cut off from the world, right? It's not this isolated entity. And so if you want to think about the music, if you want to learn about the music, it's really important that you understand a whole lot of other things around it. That was sort of what I saw originally, initially as a politics. And I think the other thing is maybe you need to do something about it. That just being a fan of something, and particularly around race, for example, like being a deeply knowledgeable and passionate fan of soul music, for example, doesn't mean you actually are doing anything. That you need to act on what you're finding in the music. That fandom isn't enough. Fandom can't, or knowledge about the music can't stand in as the only thing you would do. I think that's something that I saw as his politics.
Good.
Danny, if I could add something.
Sure.
I think part of that invitation was, it's part of that sense of, as you were saying, even fun in the funny and the mean, and the part of that invitation was an invitation. These musicians make music, and it was so clear that he understood this. There's this great little song by a band called the Del Lords about how the drummer plays the drums because of everything that's messed up in his life and how powerless he feels. And people make big sounds because they want to be heard in some way. And in that space created by this music, there was an invitation to have a discussion that nobody was having anywhere else. And that was just so clear in Dave's writing that we had an opportunity for a discussion that was carved out by this music, I think.
Adam, you want to add anything? You want to ask?
Just by way of introduction.
Or any question.
Yeah. I think I'll just throw out there that this was all new to me. I just finished the book this morning. Thank you, Lou, for lending me the advanced copy of it. I've read every page of it, and I think every page of it is really a treasure. And I'm not exaggerating. I think the story that it tells is so careful and intentional, and the writing, to me as an artist, guided by my understanding of what it means to be a revolutionary and a commitment to contributing to a revolutionary process. As an artist, specifically as a musician, is just incredibly energizing and inspiring. And some of the questions I'm bringing to this conversation that I hope to hear more from the panelists and everyone who's taken time out of their days to be here today have to do with not only the themes in the book about American music and what it says about us and where we are in history, but also like how can we as cultural workers continue to hold each other to these high standards? And when I say cultural workers, I use that intentionally to kind of cut across the boundary between musicians and music writers, because that's what comes across, is that Dave Marsh is an artist. He's not just a shadow artist, right? He's a storyteller in his own right, and he's challenging fellow artists to the highest possible standard. And so for me, as an artist pursuing like individual goals and stories and projects, developing an individual voice, I think I'm left with this question, like, how do we do this as a movement? Like, while giving each other space to develop our own individual voices, also like wage a war together as an army, fighting for, you know, a culture that reflects our full humanity and can transform society.
That's great.
So we got about an hour to solve that?
We could take an hour and 10 minutes if you'd like.
Okay.